United States of America began as a political experiment, a form of self-government that had never been tried before. The people who settled in America were pilgrims, seeking their promised land. They fled the oppressive regimes of Europe to find a place where they could live in freedom and worship in their own way. The early Americans' love of liberty was so strong that it was practically a religion. Tocqueville called it the dogma of the sovereignty of the people. The voice of the people was the voice of God. This attitude was consistent with Protestant theology, which teaches that the Word of God is accessible to everyone. Salvation, in this worldview, doesn't come through priests or anyone with special authority. At first, Americans resisted the idea of a strong federal government, but James Madison and others persuaded the people that this was absolutely necessary. They explained that a republic, a hierarchical form of government, is better than direct democracy because it protects the rights of minority factions. The masses, he explained, are subject to unruly passions, but with representatives of the highest virtue and moral character, it becomes possible to protect the liberty of everyone, not just the majority. Knowing that power corrupts, the founders created a system in which power originates from the people. As the power is delegated upward to representatives, it's separated and divided to prevent any one person or group from becoming oppressive. Any power not explicitly delegated is retained by the people. In the beginning, the American experiment worked fairly well. However, the people, who supposedly valued liberty and equal rights, didn't hesitate to take away the freedom and property of those who didn't fit in for whatever reason. Americans have been especially suspicious of anyone whose outside loyalties might undermine popular sovereignty. The original Constitution didn't give the federal government much power to intervene on behalf of the oppressed. That began to change with Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. Around the same time, a new threat to liberty was emerging, one that the founders hadn't fully anticipated. Industrialism was concentrating ownership of property into the hands of capitalists, leaving workers without access to property. This led many people to look to the western frontier as a possible safety valve. As long as workers had access to land, they could escape the corruption of industrial society. It was hoped that this would lead to an economic republic that would match the political republic. The Western migration and the Homestead Acts helped for a time, but eventually all the land became settled, and nothing could stop industrialism from taking over. Workers responded by organizing into labor unions. Various theories of socialism and anarchism were discussed. Such groups were often regarded as violent and seditious. Revolts were put down quickly. Over time, however, public sentiment began to soften as people realized that something had to be done to help working people. The progressive movement relied on government authority to rein in big business and to help the poor. But conservatives became concerned that the government was becoming too big and too powerful. We had strayed too far from the original intent of the Founding Fathers. Today, the political environment is divided into two opposing camps. People choose one or the other, depending on whether they prioritize liberty or equality. When it comes to hierarchies, both sides are self-contradictory. Many conservatives and libertarians value popular sovereignty and want to limit the power of the federal government. This sentiment is similar to that of the early Americans, who resisted the idea of a hierarchy. But on the economic side, they reject the idea of equality and would allow wealthy capitalists to rule over the working class, a top-down hierarchical structure. Progressives speak of the need for greater democracy, a flat structure in which everyone is equal. However, most progressives look to the authority of the government to implement this equality. They accept the political hierarchy as long as it helps the downtrodden and oppressed. We Americans can't seem to decide how we feel about hierarchies. We accept them when they support our core values and reject them when they don't. The truth is that the hierarchical system is the ideal order, and we don't have to fear hierarchies as long as the power still originates from the people. We strayed from the ideal order when we allowed industrialism to take power away from the people. The reality, whether we like it or not, is that political power follows economic power. We must begin to accept the fact that we cannot have liberty without ownership of capital. Worker ownership is necessary for the preservation of American freedom. We need to learn how to view worker ownership and cooperation outside the distorted lens of the traditional dichotomy. Conservatives like the idea of self-reliance and self-determination, but they're concerned that cooperation is too much like socialism. It's seen as impractical in a competitive market. Progressives are attracted to cooperation because they like the idea of equality. No bosses, everything is shared. But this is an incorrect view. Worker ownership does not imply equality or an absence of hierarchies. Most of the theories of socialism and anarchism reject private ownership, when in fact it's the solution. Instead of social ownership, we need to spread out individual ownership as widely as possible so that everyone is a proprietor. Private ownership is a natural right. We can compare it to the concept of inheritance, which in ancient times carried both literal and symbolic meaning. It's our prerogative to claim that which is rightfully ours, but that doesn't mean that it's delivered to us on a silver platter. We still have to seek for it. Americans have tended to turn to political leaders who promise to increase or decrease spending, raise or lower taxes, regulate or deregulate. But traditional strategies will have little effect on the underlying problem. Today, we need a new generation of pilgrims. We need to seek for our promised land. In our quest to escape tyranny, we need to rediscover natural moral laws and universal truth, not just in our political system, but also our economic system. One of these natural laws is the principle of ownership, which can be described by a simple statement of purpose. We must seek to become owners of productive capital. Seeking ownership is the first step in building an economic republic. Next on our pilgrim's journey, we'll look at how to go about obtaining ownership.